They thought the sky belonged to them because they built the flying machines forgetting I held the keys. When they handed me an empty cardboard box and a cold termination letter, they did not just fire a loyal employee, they locked down their entire $1 billion drone fleet. As those arrogant executives realize their mistake, I am sipping a martini across town, negotiating with the exact people about to buy their company for absolute pennies. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to be completely honest with you. YouTube recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to operate. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just a $1 donation, so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comment section below. Now let me tell you about Harper Rivera. I am 34 years old and hold the exhausting title of Director of Airspace Compliance at AeroVantage. To the outside world and the glossy tech magazines, AeroVantage is the undisputed crown jewel of Silicon Valley logistics. We are a premier drone delivery startup, promising to drop a package on your high-rise balcony before you even finish clicking the checkout button. But underneath the sleek chrome branding, the minimalist corporate logos, and the endless media hype, this entire empire is held together by duct tape, blind panic, and my own two hands. For 12 grueling years, I poured 80 hours a week into this place. 80 hours a week of breathing recycled office air, surviving on lukewarm takeout, and navigating the labyrinth of federal bureaucracy. I built their entire legal foundation from absolute zero when we were just 5 people in a damp garage. It was a typical Tuesday morning, which meant the office felt less like a tech utopia and more like a war zone disguised as an open-plan playground. The air smelled of expensive pour-over coffee, frantic sweat, and impending federal indictments. My 3 curved monitors flashed with angry red warnings. I was furiously typing, processing dozens of emergency flight clearance codes from the Federal Automated Aviation Commission, or the FAAC. In the span of 45 minutes, I had already intercepted and neutralized 3 massive urban airspace violation fines that would have grounded our entire East Coast fleet and instantly bankrupted the quarterly budget. One of our delivery drones was 3 seconds away from clipping a medical transport helicopter's restricted flight path. Another had its navigation system scrambled by a rogue localized signal and was drifting dangerously close to a commercial airport's no-fly zone. I was manually overriding their automated routes, inputting the encrypted federal override keys to force the machines into emergency hover modes. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bridging the chaotic, unpredictable reality of the open sky and the strict, unforgiving letter of federal aviation law. Then the frosted glass door to the main bullpen swung open, and the air pressure in the room seemed to shift entirely. Enter Sterling Vance, our newly appointed Vice President of Strategy. He was 26, maybe 27, dressed in a pristine gray cashmere sweater, pushed up to the elbows. He radiated the unearned, smug confidence of a man who had never actually built anything in his entire life, but was extremely good at taking credit for it. Sterling was a professional buzzword generator. He worshipped blindly at the altar of artificial intelligence, automation, and machine learning. He viewed anything that required actual human sweat, tedious regulatory reading, or manual oversight as a disgusting flaw in his perfect, frictionless technological utopia. He gathered the senior staff near the artisanal water cooler, effectively blocking the walkway, and started his daily sermon. "Listen up, team," Sterling announced, his voice carrying that arrogant, practiced cadence of a tech conference reject. "We are scaling way too slowly. The regulatory bottleneck is suffocating our quarterly projections and scaring off Series D funding. Starting next month, we are deploying a fully integrated artificial intelligence model to handle all compliance and airspace clearance. We are automating the legal department. No more manual filing, no more human error, no more ancient red tape holding back our innovation." I sat in my ergonomic chair staring at the back of his perfectly styled head and smiled a deeply bitter, cynical smile. Sterling was giving a masterclass in aggressive corporate ignorance. He was completely oblivious to the actual central nervous system of the company he was supposed to be strategizing for. He threw around words like synergy and disruptive paradigm shifts, but he did not realize that AeroVantage was not running on some magical self-learning algorithm. It was running on the Omega Protocol certificate. The Omega Protocol is the highest level of federal security clearance for automated commercial flight in urban sectors. And crucially, it was not granted to AeroVantage as a corporate entity. The federal government does not issue unrestricted airspace access to a volatile startup that changes its core business model every 6 months. They issue it to a human being who has undergone extreme vetting. That certificate was granted to me. The entire fleet's operational capability was hardwired directly to my personal biometric signature and backed by my individual financial surety bond. Every single drone that took off was legally tethered to my fingerprint, my retina scan, and my flawless 12-year track record with the aviation authorities. Looking around at the nodding heads of the executive team, who were practically drooling over Sterling's empty promises, the cold truth washed over me. After 12 years of sacrificing my youth, my weekends, and my sanity, I was nothing more than an invisible cog to them. They were blinded by empty growth charts and the intoxicating illusion of endless technological expansion. They saw compliance as a janitorial task, completely unaware that I was the only thing preventing the federal government from crushing their billion-dollar toys into scrap metal. I did not interrupt his speech. I did not raise my hand to correct him or beg for my worth to be recognized. Instead, I quietly turned back to my primary workstation. I pulled a heavily encrypted solid-state drive from my locked desk drawer and plugged it into the hidden port beneath my desk. With a few rapid keystrokes, I began silently backing up my entire personal work log, my biometric interaction histories, and the master decryption keys to the Omega Protocol. It was a cautious, paranoid habit, forged over a decade of saving this exact company from dozens of hidden catastrophic legal messes they never even knew they were in. The transfer progress bar crawled across the screen, illuminating my face with a harsh clinical light. 50%, 70%, 99%. Complete. If they wanted to worship the machine and push out the humans, I would gladly let them. But I was going to make sure my ghost was no longer residing in it. The notification chimed exactly at 11:03 in the morning on a Friday. In the modern corporate ecosystem, receiving an unprompted calendar invite for a sudden one-on-one sync at 11:03 on a Friday is the equivalent of waking up to find a horsehead in your bed. It is an unnatural, awkward sliver of time, deliberately chosen by human resources to ensure maximum disorientation before the weekend, leaving the target with no time to rally allies or cause a scene. The subject line read simply, "Leadership Alignment," but the sender was Megan, the Director of Human Resources. I did not need predictive algorithms to see the future. The sterile scent of an impending corporate execution was practically wafting through the air conditioning vents. I walked into Conference Room B, a suffocating glass box designed with maximum acoustic dampening, so the rest of the floor could not hear the desperate pleas of dying careers. Megan sat at the edge of the sleek oak table wearing a practiced expression of manufactured empathy. Next to her sat Sterling, leaning back in his ergonomic chair with his ankles crossed, looking as though he had just won a prestigious country club golf tournament. There was a thin manila folder resting exactly in the center of the table. My 12 years of blood, sweat, and relentless legal warfare had been neatly condensed into 3 pages of recycled paper. "Harper, please have a seat," Megan said, her voice dripping with the kind of gentle, synthesized regret they teach in executive management seminars. As you know, AeroVantage is pivoting toward a more agile, technology-driven future. As part of this transition, we are undergoing a lean restructuring phase to better align with our new operational goals. Unfortunately, your position has been identified as redundant. Redundant. The word hung in the chilled air of the soundproof room. Megan pushed the folder across the table. They were offering me a severance package that amounted to a miserable 2 months of base salary and a handful of stock options that were strategically timed to expire before they ever vested. It was an insulting pittance, a remarkably cheap payoff designed to usher me quietly out the back door so Sterling could play supreme commander without any annoying legal oversight breathing down his neck. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice, nor did I demand an explanation for my sudden disposal. I felt an icy, profound stillness wash over me, a chilling, terrifying calmness that completely contrasted with the sterile corporate violence taking place. I looked directly into Sterling's eyes. He was visibly waiting for a reaction, perhaps a desperate plea, a burst of anger, or an emotional breakdown he could easily dismiss as unprofessional. I gave him absolutely nothing. "I have just one question," I said, my tone perfectly flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. "Who will authenticate the biometrics for the 48-hour flight approval cycle right before the new investor meeting?" Sterling actually chuckled a short, arrogant burst of breath. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his cashmere-clad forearms on the table as if he were explaining basic arithmetic to a slow child. "Harper, you are still thinking in the past," Sterling said, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "We are fully integrating the new generative model by midnight tonight. The system will automatically populate and authorize all necessary federal compliance forms moving forward. We simply do not need human bottlenecks slowing down the deployment pipeline anymore. The algorithms have it covered." A human bottleneck. That was what he called the only lifeline keeping his entire logistics fleet from plunging out of the sky. He fundamentally believed that a piece of predictive software could forge a legally binding heartbeat. "I see," I replied calmly. I stood up. I did not offer a handshake to either of them. I offered no warnings, shared no parting words of wisdom, nor did I bother to point out the disastrous business-ruining flaw in his reasoning. When you see someone eagerly dousing themselves in gasoline with a lit match in hand, it isn't your duty to give a lecture on flammability. You merely step aside to stay out of the blast radius. I exited the glass-walled office, abandoning Megan mid-sentence as she frantically tried to outline the tedious logistics of my continuing health coverage. I returned to my desk, the epicenter of my professional universe for more than a decade. My curved monitors were already locked, my network access revoked by the IT department before my chair even had time to cool down. They were incredibly efficient, I will give them that. But they forgot about the physical hardware. Reaching beneath the main console, my hand found the heavy encrypted USB security drive plugged directly into the mainframe. This small, unassuming piece of metal contained the master registry of my personal certificate, the absolute authority, the pulse of the entire operation. With one swift, silent motion, I unplugged it from the company server. I dropped the drive into the bottom of my leather handbag, feeling its satisfying weight. I packed absolutely nothing else. I left my favorite ceramic coffee mug, the framed photographs, and the meticulously organized legal binders right where they were. I left them a hollow, empty system with absolutely zero handover instructions, no emergency contingency files, and no roadmap for the spectacular nightmare they were about to wake up to. As I pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the main lobby and stepped out into the bright Friday afternoon sun, I took a deep breath of unfiltered city air. The suffocating weight of the past 12 years instantly evaporated from my shoulders. I felt an intoxicating, absolute sense of freedom. Looking up at the sky, I watched a lone delivery drone buzz quietly between two glass high-rises. The invisible clock had officially started ticking, and the countdown to the total obliteration of Aero Vantage had begun. Exactly 48 hours had passed since I walked out of that suffocating glass conference room. It was Sunday morning, and instead of breathing recycled, anxiety-filled office air, I was sitting on the sun-drenched patio of an artisanal cafe tucked away in the city's financial district. A perfectly pulled double espresso rested on the wrought iron table in front of me, its rich dark scent blending with the crisp morning breeze. I had my personal tablet propped up against a sugar dispenser. On the high-resolution screen, a proprietary tracking application one I had coded myself years ago to monitor compliance anomalies displayed the city's sprawling airspace. Hundreds of tiny blue dots moved in organized glowing streams across the digital map. Those were my former company's delivery drones still running purely on the residual inertia of my last authorized security clearance cycle. Across town at the AeroVantage headquarters, the atmosphere was undoubtedly the exact opposite of serene. I did not need a hidden camera to know precisely what was happening in the main engineering bullpen. Sterling Vance was surely pacing the floor in his expensive loafers, barking orders at sleep-deprived software developers. Today was the most critical day in the history of their startup. They were aggressively preparing for a massive live flight demonstration, a synchronized urban delivery route designed to dazzle the executives at Vanguard Pinnacle. Vanguard was a notoriously ruthless venture capital firm, and Sterling was trying to secure a $1 billion investment from them. He needed the sky to be absolutely flawless to seal the deal. He was banking everything on his shiny new artificial intelligence model, assuming it would seamlessly handle the complex invisible web of federal regulations while he took all the glory. But the invisible grace period was over. The 48-hour cycle I had casually mentioned during my termination was not a vague estimate. It was a hard-coded federal deadline. At precisely 9:45 in the morning, the first cracks began to shatter their pristine technological illusion. I watched my tablet screen closely. Suddenly, a massive cluster of blue dots operating along the eastern seaboard abruptly turned a harsh warning yellow. A fraction of a second later, they flashed to a dead, alarming gray. Exactly 15% of the entire East Coast delivery fleet had just dropped off the authorized grid. They were no longer legally recognized aircraft. In the eyes of the government, they were suddenly rogue, unauthorized flying hazards. Back at the corporate command center, warning klaxons were undoubtedly blaring through the sleek, minimalist hallways. The main operations screens would be flashing a very specific, terrifying error code generated by the Federal Automated Aviation Commission. The message would be glowing in bright red text, "Airspace authorization signal lost." I could vividly picture the scene. The lead engineers, staring at their monitors in sheer panic, would frantically command the new automated machine learning model to re-establish the connection. But the artificial intelligence would just keep bouncing off the massive, impenetrable firewall of the federal government. The software was incredibly smart, generating legal templates at lightning speed. But the government servers did not care about smart algorithms or optimized workflows. They cared about the Omega Protocol. They were demanding a live human biometric handshake. The system needed a unique encrypted pulse tied to my retinal scan, my fingerprints, and my personal financial surety bond. Without my exclusive biometric signature, their billion-dollar artificial intelligence was nothing more than a digital ghost banging its fists against a solid steel vault. The horrifying reality of the situation must have hit Sterling like a runaway freight train. The arrogant, visionary vice president was suddenly faced with a rapidly grounding fleet and a vanishing billion-dollar lifeline. The cold sweat would be breaking out on his forehead as the IT director explained that the system was fundamentally, irreversibly locked out of the sky. The machines were completely blind, and the only human being who held the master keys to restore their sight had been fired, insulted, and escorted out of the building just 2 days prior. My encrypted smartphone vibrated violently against the cafe table, rattling my ceramic saucer. The caller identification displayed a restricted corporate line. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso and watched the screen go dark. 10 seconds later, it vibrated again, and again. Over the next 20 minutes, my phone registered 34 blocked calls from various extensions within AeroVantage. Sterling was likely ripping desk phones from the hands of terrified interns, desperately trying to bypass the permanent block I had placed on every single communication node connected to that company. He was probably drafting frantic pleading emails that were automatically being routed directly into my digital trash bin. I turned my attention back to my tablet. The red alarm icons were now spreading like a digital virus across the entire map, migrating from the coast directly toward the central metropolitan hub. The cascading system collapse I had mathematically predicted was unfolding with magnificent, terrifying precision. It was not a sudden explosion, but rather a slow, methodical strangulation of a logistics empire. 20% of the fleet was now grounded. Then 25. The Federal Aviation System was systematically revoking their flight privileges one sector at a time. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs, and smiled at the beautiful, quiet chaos playing out on the screen. The countdown had reached 0, and the storm I promised was finally here. By the time the morning of the heavily publicized Vanguard Pinnacle demonstration finally arrived, the crisis had escalated from a localized glitch into a catastrophic company-wide blackout. I was comfortably monitoring the live feed from my own living room, a steaming cup of green matcha tea resting in my hands. On my heavily encrypted private interface, the status bar that tracked AeroVantage's operational readiness had completely flatlined. Exactly 100% of the delivery fleet was hard-locked by the federal government. Every single quadcopter, every heavy-lift transit unit, and every sleek urban courier drone was strictly forbidden from powering up its rotors. The sky belonged entirely to the aviation authorities again, and the government was refusing to budge a single inch. At the corporate headquarters across town, the atmosphere had rapidly deteriorated into absolute unchecked hysteria. Through the grapevine of frantic industry chat rooms and encrypted direct messages from terrified former colleagues who were watching their stock options evaporate, I could paint a vivid, pathetic picture of the control room. The delegation of elite investors from Vanguard Pinnacle had already arrived in the executive lobby. They were high-powered, ruthless venture capitalists wearing bespoke suits, expecting to witness a flawless technological ballet. They wanted to see a perfectly orchestrated autonomous swarm of machines delivering packages across the city skyline, a visual justification for handing over a massive check for $1 billion. Instead, Sterling was trapped deep inside the engineering bay, sweating completely through his expensive designer clothing. The revolutionary artificial intelligence he had so arrogantly championed had entirely failed to generate a legal workaround. The government firewall remained a towering, impenetrable fortress. In the toxic, high-pressure, move-fast-and-break-things culture of Silicon Valley, executives like Sterling are fundamentally conditioned to believe that every regulatory rule is merely a suggestion, and every locked door is just a software bug waiting for an aggressive patch. Cornered, utterly terrified of public humiliation, and desperate to save the massive investment deal he made the most reckless, catastrophically foolish decision of his entire professional life, he ordered the lead software engineers to commit a massive federal crime. "Find the legacy code," Sterling reportedly screamed at the panicked development team, his voice echoing sharply off the acoustic server panels. She left fragments of her authorization protocols on the old backup servers. Scrape her digital footprint, compile a synthetic biometric token, and force it through the system. The lead engineer, a brilliant but chronically anxious guy, who usually only worried about optimizing battery thermal dynamics, tried desperately to explain the massive legal and technical risks. He warned Sterling that faking a federal security clearance was a profound violation carrying mandatory prison sentences. He pleaded with management to just delay the presentation. But Sterling would not listen to reason. His ego was entirely on the line. "Just spoof the signal," Sterling demanded, slamming his fist violently onto the central command console. "We just need to fool their navigation system for 2 hours. Exactly 2 hours. Once Vanguard signs the term sheet, we will have $1 billion in the bank to pay off whatever fines we incur. Make the drones fly right now, or you are all fired." Under the crushing threat of immediate termination and industry blacklisting, the terrified engineering team surrendered. They frantically dug into the archaic legacy servers, patching together fragmented ghosts of my past login sessions. They built a crude synthetic wrapper around an old digital footprint and violently rammed it into the federal authentication portal, blindly praying the government security system was too slow to notice the forgery. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I had spent over a decade protecting that company from foreign hackers' corporate espionage and their own profound stupidity. I knew exactly how incredibly reckless the internal engineering culture was, and I fully anticipated that a desperate cornered executive might try to digitally hijack my identity once I was out of the building. Long before I was unexpectedly fired, I had woven a highly sophisticated, invisible cryptographic tripwire deep within the architecture of my Omega Protocol certificate. It was a digital landmine designed specifically to detonate the very moment anyone attempted an unauthorized duplication or a synthetic spoofing of my biometric signature. The exact second Sterling's engineers pushed their counterfeit code into the federal portal, the tripwire snapped. The government servers did not just simply reject the forged signal, they aggressively and violently snapped back. The federal tracking system instantly recognized the unauthorized synthetic ping not as a simple localized glitch, but as a deliberate, highly hostile cyber attack. In the eyes of the automated aviation authorities, AeroVantage was no longer a civilian logistics startup experiencing technical difficulties. They were an active, dangerous threat attempting to digitally hijack commercial airspace. The retaliatory response was immediate and entirely merciless. Deep within the heavily fortified command centers of the federal government, a Level 5 red alert was triggered. On my tablet screen, the visual representation of their downfall was spectacular. A shockwave of crimson red pulsed across the digital map, washing over every single AeroVantage facility in the nation. The federal authorities invoked an absolute emergency hard kill switch. Across the city, any rogue test drone that had managed to lift a few feet off the ground had its propulsion engines instantly severed. Rotors locked rigidly mid-spin. Emergency automated parachutes deployed with loud popping sounds drifting the incredibly expensive machines uselessly down onto warehouse roofs, empty parking lots, and city sidewalks. The thousands of drones still resting securely on their launch pads were permanently bricked, their internal flight computers wiped completely clean and permanently locked under federal encryption keys. The entire $1 billion fleet was instantly reduced to a pile of expensive plastic paperweights in a matter of milliseconds. But the devastating technological lockdown was only the very first wave of the nightmare for Sterling. Back at the AeroVantage headquarters, the executive suite was desperately trying to keep the Vanguard Pinnacle investors entertained with sparkling water artisanal pastries and vague smiling promises of a minor atmospheric delay. Sterling was practically sprinting down the glass corridor, furiously typing on his tablet, screaming at his team to figure out why the entire corporate network had just flatlined. He never even made it to the lobby to greet his guests. The heavy reinforced glass doors of the main entrance were violently shoved open, instantly shattering the pristine, quiet elegance of the corporate reception area. A heavily armed tactical team of federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked closely by stern inspectors from the Federal Automated Aviation Commission, swarmed into the lobby. They were not wearing tailored business suits. They wore heavy tactical vests, boldly displaying federal acronyms in bold yellow lettering. The lead agent completely bypassed the terrified front desk receptionist, holding up a thick stack of federal warrants stamped with aggressive red ink. "Sterling Vance," the lead agent's voice boomed through the open-plan office, entirely silencing the frantic murmurs of the entire floor. "Step away from all electronic devices and keep your hands exactly where we can see them. We are seizing this entire facility under the suspicion of federal airspace fraud, digital identity theft, and attempted hijacking." The elite investors from Vanguard Pinnacle stood completely frozen in the visitor lounge, their expensive champagne flutes hovering awkwardly in midair. They watched in absolute unblinking shock as the visionary vice president of the tech company they were about to acquire was aggressively cornered by federal law enforcement. The grand futuristic demonstration of the next generation of logistics had spectacularly transformed into a humiliating live-action crime scene. The billion-dollar dream was officially dead, suffocated by the very hubris that built it. And as I sat in my living room watching the news alerts begin to flood my phone, I felt a deep, resonant wave of satisfaction knowing I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy them. They had enthusiastically pulled the trigger themselves. The afternoon sun felt warm against my face as I strolled along the winding tree-lined paths of the city's largest botanical park. It was a beautiful, idyllic setting standing in sharp, almost poetic contrast to the absolute digital carnage currently dominating global financial news networks. My encrypted smartphone was buzzing relentlessly in my coat pocket, but not with desperate calls from my former employer. They were far too busy dealing with the federal agents currently dismantling their servers. Instead, my screen was lighting up with rapid-fire breaking news alerts. Major media outlets were loudly reporting the unprecedented raid on Aero Vantage. Headlines screamed about federal indictments, grounded fleets, and the spectacular collapse of Silicon Valley's golden logistics child. I paused near a quiet stone fountain, watching the water cascade beautifully into the pool below, savoring the profound silence of my own anonymity. I was the invisible architect of the biggest corporate implosion of the decade, yet to the joggers and tourists passing by I was just a woman enjoying a peaceful autumn walk. Then my phone rang. The caller identification did not display a blocked corporate extension or an angry former colleague. It showed an international routing number shielded by heavy enterprise-grade encryption. It was a phantom signal, the kind used strictly by high-net-worth individuals and elite financial institutions to bypass public networks. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the device to my ear. "Harper Rivera," a voice said. It was a woman's voice, remarkably calm, sophisticated, and carrying an unmistakable undertone of absolute authority. She did not ask if it was me. She stated it as an indisputable fact. "Who is this?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, giving away absolutely nothing. "My name is Valeria Knox," the voice replied smoothly. "I am the managing partner at Vanguard Pinnacle. My team and I were actually just enjoying some highly overpriced sparkling water in the executive lobby of your former company when the federal tactical teams decided to aggressively crash the party." I stopped walking. Vanguard Pinnacle, the apex predators of the venture capital world, the exact people who were supposed to be signing a check for $1 billion today to save Sterling's fragile empire. "It sounds like you had a very eventful morning, Valeria," I replied, a faint smile touching my lips. "I hope you managed to secure your investment capital before the federal authorities seized their bank accounts." Valeria let out a short, elegant laugh. "Oh, we never had any intention of signing that term sheet today, Harper. Do you honestly believe a firm like Vanguard casually hands over $1 billion without tearing a company's internal architecture apart first? We do not trust visionary slide decks or arrogant young men in cashmere sweaters. We rely on forensic accountants and deep-cover tech investigators." She paused for a moment, letting the heavy weight of her words settle between us. The ambient noise of the park seemed to fade entirely into the background. "We spent the last 6 months conducting a shadow audit on Aero Vantage." Valeria continued, her tone sharpening into a surgical instrument. "Sterling Vance aggressively pitched a proprietary artificial intelligence system that magically navigated complex urban airspace regulations. He called it an automated paradigm shift, but my analysts cracked their black box. We discovered there was no magic algorithm. The entire billion-dollar valuation of that company rested entirely on a single point of failure. It rested firmly on the legal brilliance, the biometric security clearance, and the personal federal certificate of their overworked director of airspace compliance." She knew. She knew absolutely everything. Vanguard had seen right through the hollow technological facade and found the invisible human engine running the entire machine. "When my inside sources informed me that they had actually fired you exactly 48 hours before our final demonstration," Valeria said, her voice dripping with genuine disbelief, "I was utterly fascinated. I insisted on attending today's meeting just to watch the fireworks. Seeing Sterling Vance dragged away in handcuffs by federal agents was easily the best entertainment I have had all year. It was a mathematically inevitable outcome, I stated flatly. You simply cannot automate federal accountability. Exactly, Valeria agreed. Which brings me to why I am calling you on a highly secure line. I am officially suspending all financial negotiations with AeroVantage. That company is legally dead. But the market demand for drone logistics is still incredibly massive, and I am sitting on a giant pool of dormant capital. I want to build a new airspace management monopoly. Harper. And I want to do it correctly this time. I am offering you a blank check. Name your absolute price. We will establish a brand new infrastructure firm from the ground up entirely under your operational control, with my firm's unlimited financial backing. A blank check from Vanguard Pinnacle was the holy grail of the corporate world. It was an offer that would make any Silicon Valley executive weep with joy. But standing there by the fountain, looking at the towering glass city skyline, I felt a much deeper, darker ambition taking root. I did not just want to start over. I wanted total domination, and I wanted it carved directly out of the bones of the people who had casually thrown me away. A blank check is very generous, Valeria, I replied, my voice dropping to a low, highly dangerous register. But I do not want to build from scratch. Why should we spend 2 years manufacturing new drones and negotiating fresh hardware leases when there is a massive pre-built logistical fleet currently sitting paralyzed in warehouses all across the country? The AeroVantage hardware, Valeria murmured, instantly catching my strategic drift. It is fully locked by the government, completely useless. It is useless to them, I corrected her sharply, because they do not have my biometric keys. But if I re-establish my federal credentials under a newly formed corporate entity, I can instantly authorize that exact same hardware to legally fly again. I took a deep breath, mapping out the ruthless strategy in my mind. Here is my counteroffer, I stated, asserting absolute control over the high-stakes negotiation. Vanguard will fund me, yes, but our first mutual objective is to relentlessly force AeroVantage into complete, unrecoverable bankruptcy within exactly 7 days. I want you to leverage your media contacts and your aggressive legal team to ensure their stock price hits absolute zero by Friday. I want their board of directors bleeding cash and begging for a corporate bailout. And then, Valeria asked, her tone reflecting a deep predatory thrill. And then, I smiled coldly, we swoop in as the only qualified buyer in the entire market. We purchase their entire hardware infrastructure, their warehouses, and their physical assets in a liquidation fire sale for absolute pennies on the dollar. We do not just build a new company. We cannibalize their corpse, steal their physical empire, and establish a completely unified monopoly over the sky. I want to own everything they ever touched. There was a long, heavy silence on the secure line. I could almost hear the rapid calculation of billions of dollars shifting hands in Valeria's sharp mind. She was thoroughly assessing the sheer brutality and the unparalleled brilliance of the maneuver. Harper Rivera, Valeria finally said, her voice resonating with deep, profound respect. You are far more dangerous than my senior analysts warned me. I will have my elite legal team draft the preliminary acquisition documents and the predatory pricing strategy by 5 o'clock this evening. Let us go hunting. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, feeling a massive surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline coursing through my veins. The power dynamic had violently and permanently shifted. I was no longer the discarded employee seeking quiet survival. I was the apex predator now, and the sky was finally about to become my absolute domain. The emergency board of directors meeting was convened on a highly secure video conference line just 48 hours after the federal raid. The digital grid of faces on the screen looked like a gallery of the Walking Dead. The chief executive officer was rubbing his temples, looking like he had aged 20 years over the weekend. Remarkably, Sterling Vance was also on the call, dialing in from what looked like a stark white holding room with a cheap laminate table. Even while awaiting his formal federal bail hearing, he was still desperately trying to spin the unmitigated disaster. It is just a temporary information technology glitch. Sterling pleaded, his voice cracking with panic, completely lacking his usual cashmere-wrapped arrogance. "My legal team assures me we can negotiate a fine. We just need a bridge loan to keep the servers running for the next 30 days. We can fix the legacy code. The hardware is completely fine." Before the chief executive officer could even respond to that absolute delusion, a sudden chime echoed through the virtual room. 2 uninvited video feeds suddenly populated the center of the grid. The entire digital boardroom fell into a suffocating, absolute silence. I was sitting in a plush leather chair in my newly leased corporate headquarters, dressed in a sharp-tailored black suit. Sitting right beside me was Valeria Knox, looking perfectly radiant and exceptionally dangerous. "Sterling," Valeria said, breaking the dead silence with a voice like shattering ice, "you are not experiencing an information technology glitch. You are experiencing corporate death. I am officially informing this board that Vanguard Pinnacle is not only withdrawing our $1 billion acquisition offer, but our legal department filed a massive lawsuit against AeroVantage exactly 10 minutes ago for systemic investor fraud." Several board members audibly gasped. The chief executive officer looked as though he was going to have a sudden cardiac event. "How did you get on this secure call?" the chief technology officer demanded, his voice shaking. I leaned forward directly into the camera lens, finally removing the invisible mask of the obedient, quiet employee I had worn for 12 years. "I built your entire security architecture from the ground up," I stated calmly, my voice projecting absolute authority. "Bypassing your conference firewall took me exactly 12 seconds. I picked up a thick, officially stamped document from my mahogany desk and held it up to the camera so every single terrified executive could read the bold red lettering. This is a federal decree from the Federal Automated Aviation Commission," I announced, savoring every single syllable. "Because your vice president of strategy ordered the forging of federal biometric credentials, AeroVantage is permanently and entirely banned from operating in United States airspace. Your licenses are revoked. Your hardware is blacklisted. Your company is legally dead." "Harper, please," the chief executive officer practically begged, his eyes wide with absolute desperation. "We made a catastrophic mistake. We will fire Sterling immediately. We will give you a seat on the board. We will double, no, we will triple your previous salary. Name your absolute price. We just need you to come back and unlock the fleet." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of an apex predator looking at a trapped animal. "I am afraid you do not understand the new market dynamics," I replied smoothly. "You have no fleet to unlock. My new infrastructure firm, backed entirely by Vanguard Pinnacle, officially signed an exclusive multi-year contract with the federal government at 6 o'clock this morning. Every single commercial delivery drone that wishes to take off within the borders of this country must now be routed directly through my proprietary compliance network. You do not get to hire me back, but if you manage to avoid bankruptcy, which you will not, you will be paying my company a premium licensing fee for every single package you ever attempt to deliver." The sheer magnitude of the trap finally closed around them. I had not just taken my job back, I had taken the entire sky. "You cannot do this," Sterling shouted from his holding room, slamming his fist on his cheap table. "We built this company." I looked directly at his video feed, letting out a soft, highly dismissive laugh. "The system has been fully automated now, gentlemen," I said, using his exact words against him. "We simply do not need human bottlenecks cumbering the pipeline anymore." I reached forward and severed the connection. The digital boardroom instantly vanished into blackness. Later that afternoon, the news networks broadcasted live footage of Sterling Vance being formally escorted into a federal transport vehicle by armed agents, his wrists firmly secured in heavy steel handcuffs. He was facing up to 20 years in federal prison for data tampering and aviation fraud. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling glass window of my pristine new corner office. The afternoon sun was casting a golden glow over the sprawling metropolis. Outside, slicing perfectly through the clear blue sky, a sleek, newly painted drone flew past my window. It was carrying the bold silver logo of my brand new company. I took a deep, satisfying breath, watching my personal fleet conquer the horizon. They thought they could throw me to the wolves, completely forgetting that I was the one who trained them. The sky finally had a new master, and I was never letting go. Thank you so much for listening to our story today. We truly appreciate your time and would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let us know in the comments. If you found today's story highly entertaining, please consider helping us out with a donation of just $1. You can do this quickly by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments section below. Your generous support provides the necessary funds to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating more incredible stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.